if you could bring that up, Janice. And there's opioid myths and fact, and this is what you would call an unbranded marketing piece, correct?
This is an unbranded marketing piece.
Cool, same thing, but the point is that it's not discussing a specific product or brand, it's talking about a class of products, in this case, opioids, right?
Yes, and unbranded meaning not regulated by the FDA. They can't do anything about the information in unbranded materials.
Well, the point is, it's not discussing a particular brand product, correct?
Yes,
Is that correct?
yes, that's correct.
So in Finding Relief, for example, it's not specifically discussing Nucynta or Nucynta ER, correct?
No specific product is mentioned.
Right. So if you wanted to find out specific indications for Nucynta ER, for example, or specific FDA-approved doses, you'd have to go somewhere else other than this unbranded marketing, right?
Well, this material is meant for patients, so I don't think a patient would be looking up labels.
Right. But it'd be the same for unbranded materials for doctors. Again, you wouldn't be able to look to those to get specific product information, right?
Correct. An unbranded marketing doesn't have specific product information.
You'd have to look to specific product literature, right?
Or medical literature.
That dealt specifically with the product, right?
Well, it would depend on why a clinician would want the information.
To consider prescribing it to a patient?
So, if a clinician is considering prescribing an opioid, there are other places a prescriber can go besides the product, the package insert.
Right, like you look at some kind of app on your phone, right?
Yes,
What's the name of that app?
Micromedics. I used to use Epocrates, but it had pharmaceutical ads on it, so now I use Micromedics.
And you know where they get the specific product information?
I believe the bulk of the information in Micromedics comes from the package insert, and maybe there are some other sources. So it would indicate, for example, a warning on Micromedics. Box warnings, you would see that on an app like Micromedics.
Sure, and a doctor would want to see that information before making a decision as to whether to prescribe a particular drug to a patient, right?
Yes, absolutely. If a doctor is going to prescribe a medication, particularly for the first time that they're unfamiliar with, that doctor should know have some basic information about that medication.
And so, circling back, the doctor can't get that specific information from unbranded marketing materials, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So let's look at Finding Relief. And we are on page 10. And the myth that counsel asked you about, opioid medications are always addictive, and the fact there is stated, many studies show that opioids are rarely addictive when used properly for the management of chronic pain. Did I read that correctly?
That's right, Bob.
So let's go.
That's what it says.
Yeah, let's go back. That's all I asked. Let's go back to J3606. And I think that should still be in front of you. I don't know that we organized the exhibits over lunch, but it's possible that our crew's so good they did. No, so you should have it. It's the FDA Guide to Safe Use of Pain Medicine that we looked at a little bit earlier.
I have a stack of materials
Okay.
here.
This one.
Thank you.
It's 3606.
think I got it.
Okay, look at page 4. The second paragraph, where it also talks about studies and what they show about properly managed medical use of opioid analgesic compounds. And can we pull out both of those and put them on the screen? So the statement that you were critical of says, many studies show that opioids are rarely addictive when used properly for the management of chronic pain. And the statement in the FDA brochure says, studies have shown that properly managed medical use of opioid analgesic compounds taken exactly as prescribed is safe, can manage pain effectively, and rarely causes addiction. Did I read that correctly?
I believe you did.
And the Finding Relief brochure is, take a look at page 2, Exhibit 1247. What year is this?
2009.
And I believe we pinned down on this earlier document, the FDA brochure, Guide to Safe Use of Pain Medicine. That was also 2009, right?
Yes.
So I want to ask you, so we'll come back in a little bit to the Finding Relief and talk about some of the other aspects of it. But the FDA refers to studies to support the statement that appeared in the brochure that when used properly, opioids rarely cause addiction. And yesterday you pointed to some of those studies, and if I recall your testimony, you were fairly critical, saying that some of these studies, or the reference to these studies was deceptive. And one of the studies was, I believe, a 2009 study by David Fishbane. Is that correct?
I'm not seeing on the document, this FDA document, where they're citing David Fishbane. I saw the language was similar to the language in your unbranded material, but I didn't see any citation.
Right. I think my question may not have been clear. The FDA, in the publication we were looking at, refers to studies, right?
Yes, it said studies.
And we were talking, with Mr. Beckworth, you were talking about a particular study by David Fishbane, not mentioned in the FDA publication, but separately there was a 2009 study by David Fishbane that you described as being very deceptive, correct?
Not exactly. What I believe I said was deceptive would be to cite that study as evidence that iatrogenic addiction, or to promote the idea that iatrogenic addiction is rare, because that study that was actually not a study. David Fishbane wrote a paper that we would call a systematic review that combined data from different studies, but none of the studies that were combined by David Fishbane actually assessed patients for the development of addiction. So to rely on David Fishbane's systematic review to send a message that iatrogenic addiction is rare, that's what would be deceptive.
Did you agree with the conclusions reached by Dr. Fishbane?
I don't think that Dr. Fishbane fabricated his results.
So was it your view they were valid results?
I'd have to take another look at his conclusion. I believe he concluded, based on the studies that he looked at, that they found that found is not even an appropriate term, because they didn't, in many of these studies that David Fishbane included, they didn't actually even look for addiction. But an estimate was provided for the risk of addiction, so I wouldn't agree with doing that but he did find pretty high rates of aberrant drug-taking behavior in the patients who participated in those studies, which could have been addiction. So I guess some of what he had in his conclusion seemed reasonable, but I don't think that he should have put an estimate for risk of iatrogenic addiction if the studies that were in his systematic review didn't look for addiction.
Long answer, but I think basically you're saying you agreed with some of what he reported in his paper, and you disagreed with some. Is that a fair statement?
Not really. I don't think he should have characterized his findings, all of his findings, in the way that he did.
He made a conclusion that there was a rate that was less than 4%, right?
I think he had again, I'd rather have the paper in front of me, but I think it was an estimate of iatrogenic addiction that was much less than 1%.
Okay, and you disagreed with that, right?
That's not a sensible estimate.
Okay, and you were here in court testifying that the use of this, and you called it a paper?
Systematic review paper.
Okay, systematic review was deceptive. Did you read Dr. Fishbane's article before you came here and testified that you felt the use of it was deceptive?
Yes, I've read that article many times. I haven't memorized the paper, but I have read it.
Okay, so one thing you disagree with is the conclusion that he offered of a rate of, was it abuse, addiction?
I believe he had a rate of addiction, and I think for in the paper, for patients who didn't have a history of drug or alcohol problems, I think he had a statistic that was much less than 1%.
Now, wouldn't you agree that it's not uncommon to have disagreements over conclusions drawn from data? That's not an unusual situation in the scientific and medical community, is it?
No, I think that different scientists could look at data and come to different conclusions.
Sure, and in fact, didn't that happen in connection with the prop petition when the FDA responded to it in 2013?
Not really, because the FDA agreed with what Prop was saying with regard to a lack of evidence supporting long-term use of opioids. That's why they required post-marketing studies. I don't believe there was a disagreement about the science or the lack of evidence. There was full agreement about the lack of evidence supporting a practice that had become very common.
You're going down one path, I'm trying to go down another. I'm not looking at the issue of lack of evidence. We talked a little bit about that yesterday, the difficulty in having the clinical studies, your view that there were ethical issues in doing such a study. There were conclusions that you and Prop drew based on studies that you presented to the FDA that the FDA didn't agree with, correct?
Not exactly. I think that you started by asking if scientists could look at the same data and draw different conclusions, and I said yes, and you said, isn't that what happened with the FDA? And I don't think that's what happened with the FDA. FDA didn't agree at the time with doing everything we asked them to do, but I believe they drew similar conclusions about our primary argument, which was that data is lacking. So I think they saw the evidence that we were looking at, or the lack of evidence, the lack of data, and agreed more data was necessary. There was a disagreement about what to do, but not different scientists drawing different conclusions, looking at the same data. I think that certainly happens, but I don't think the FDA response to the prop petition is necessarily a good example of that.
Well, let's take a look and see, because words matter, right?
Yes.
So take a look at Exhibit J1460, that's the prop petition. And take a look at page 2, item 6. And item 6, again, this is one of the statements of scientific basis for petition
Yes.
that's being presented by PROP to the FDA in support of its petition, right?
Yes.
And item 6 is a large sample of medical and pharmacy claims records found that 2/3 of patients who took opioids on a daily basis for 90 days were still taking opioids 5 years later.
That's correct.
Okay. Now let's look at the FDA response, 1576. You should have that as well.
I do.
And if you look at page 16, item 3, cited data on long-term opioid use and addiction do not establish a threshold for maximum duration of use. And in the first paragraph, the FDA actually quotes back that item 6 that I just read, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then they go on and they say, FDA disagrees with this statement, right?
They disagree with the statement.
Right. And
That's
they
what it
say,
says.
I'm sorry?
That is what it says.
Yeah, and they say, although the study follow-up lasted roughly 5 years, not all patients who were started on chronic opioid therapy were followed for that duration. Approximately half of the study population was followed 2 years or less. The median follow-up time was around 2 years. Throughout the course of the study period, some patients were censored due to death, disenrollment from health coverage, or other reasons. Then they go on, in the FDA's view, the study showed that among patients who were followed for 4.8 years, 2/3 were still taking opioids at the end of this period. So they're not agreeing with your conclusion from that study, are they?
They're disagreeing with our statement.
Absolutely. That's the point. So look at the next paragraph. FDA also does not agree that these data necessarily reflect a safety concern specific to longer-term use. Goes on to talk about some portion of these results certainly could be explained by adverse outcomes. Other factors may also be associated with low discontinuation rates. Correct?
That's what it says.
And then their conclusion is it would be premature to restrict opioid use to a 90-day maximum duration treatment period. That was the conclusion, right?
Right, and that's the point that I was making. What they're really disagreeing with is what we should do. And just again, to be clear, PROP wasn't asking, because the language here could imply it, we were not asking for FDA to restrict doctors' ability to prescribe more than 90 days. We wanted suggested duration of use on a label so that long-term use couldn't be promoted as safe and effective. I do believe that the FDA, in general, when you read this document thoroughly, I believe you would agree that the FDA isn't challenging our science. They're challenging what we asked them to do. They didn't want to do everything we asked them to do.
They disagreed with the conclusions that you were reaching from the studies that you were providing.
They may not have agreed with every one of our statements, but they agreed with our primary argument that evidence is lacking. And if you read through the document, you'll see they say, we agree with PROP, evidence is lacking, and that's why we are going to require manufacturers of extended release long-acting opioids to do post-marketing studies to get the research. That was our primary argument.
I understand, and we covered that, Doctor, but you submitted studies in making a request that the FDA denied, and they indicated that they didn't view the studies the same way. Let's look at the words. Look at the 4th paragraph here, if you would. And I'd appreciate it if you just answer my question yes or no. Isn't it true in this response the FDA, in analyzing and commenting on these surveys, stated, however, the cited surveys did not suggest that chronic opioid therapy causes addiction or vice versa. Correct?
Your Honor, I object to saying that's a yes or no question. It's improper. He said this response, then he highlighted one sentence. What Dr. Kwani was speaking to before he was interrupted was the entirety of the response. So potentially misleading effort. Okay.
Your Honor, I should be able to ask him specific questions without Dr. Kolodny then taking those questions and then offering whatever commentary he wishes to offer. This is cross-examination.
Well, we talked about this right before we left, and I do believe that you ask the questions, and Dr. Kolodny should respond, and if you believe that he is not satisfied with the answer, then you can object as non-responsive.
Thank you.
I understand you can ask some yes or no questions. I believe, I've been paying pretty careful attention, anticipating this might happen. I believe this is more than a yes or no question, so I sustain the objection. Yes.
So, Mr. Yoder, if you look at the sentence just before the one that you highlighted, it states FDA agrees with this assertion. They really did agree with the bulk of what we were saying in our petition. I can't say that they agreed 100% with every single statement of fact that we listed, but they agreed with us, and they just didn't agree with taking the steps, or at least taking all of the steps that we were asking them to take.
To be clear, CROP made 3 specific requests, right?
That's correct.
The FDA declined 2 of them, correct?
That's correct. Although they did do other things related to what we were asking for, so they took one of our requests and implemented it, and the other requests they didn't do exactly what we asked, but they did add additional warning materials on labels.
There's a difference, is there not, between the incidence of addiction in segments of pain patients, whatever the data is, and what the risk would be for an individual patient.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Sure. We've been talking about what the rate of addiction would be for a collection of individuals. I mean, when we've been talking about rate of addiction, that's what we've been talking about, right?
Yes.
Okay. And when it comes down to a particular individual, if I go in and a doctor is considering to prescribe an opioid for me and trying to analyze the risk to me of becoming addicted from that, that's going to be an individualized determination. Would you agree?
I think there are some individual differences. For example, young people there's good evidence that before our brain fully matures, before the age of 25, we may be more susceptible to becoming addicted to drugs, and then if young people become addicted to drugs, it can be harder to treat.
Doctor, isn't it true that when a healthcare provider is considering whether to prescribe an opioid for a patient, one of the things they should consider is the risk of addiction to that patient?
Absolutely.
And shouldn't they make that determination based on the individual patient's circumstances?
I think I agree with that.
Okay. And if you take a look at what we looked at before, it's exhibit, I'm not sure which one it is. Yeah. Why don't you pull out the Georgie's and look at it? Hang on just 1 minute. This is one. It would be. Just 1 moment, Your Honor. I apologize. Oh, we'll come back to that. What I would like to do now is talk about my client's products. And
Okay.
a lot of testimony about opioids generally, but I want to focus in now on the products that my clients actually manufactured and sold. So let's start with Nucynta.
Okay.
You're familiar with the product Nucynta, correct?
Yes.
And you're aware that Nucynta is the trade name for tapentadol, correct?
I am.
Okay. Do you know when Nucynta was first approved by the FDA?
I believe it was 2009.
I think that's about right. Let me just nail that down. If I could hand you an exhibit J1091. If I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
Can you, so exhibit 1091 is a letter from the Department of Health and Human Services, Public Health Service, Food and Drug Administration, NDA approval.
Yes.
Addressed to Ortho McNeil Janssen Pharmaceuticals, Inc. Your Honor, I would move exhibit 1091 into evidence.
Mayor, we have no objection with the caveat that this gets into the approval process. And again, we don't think we should have to deal with that, but if you're asking about the label, we do not have an objection on that basis.
We'll note 1091 into the evidence.
And if you take a look at, and strike that, so you recognize this or understand this to be the NDA approval of Nucynta by the FDA, correct?
It says NDA approval on it, but I'm not sure if I've read this document before.
Okay, we'll look at the fourth paragraph. Hopefully it's pretty clear. We have completed our review of this application. It is approved, effective on the date of this letter, for use as recommended in the enclosed agreed upon labeling text. And what's being approved here is an NDA. And are you familiar with what an NDA is?
It stands for New Drug Application.
So new drug, meaning this is the first time application is being made for approval to be able to market and sell the drug.
Yes.
And if you look at page 40, does that show the date of the approval?
The last page?
Yes, last page,
Back,
page
yes.
40.
Yes, November 20th, 2008.
So in all the materials you've reviewed in connection with the work that you've done in this case, did you see anything that demonstrated that Janssen promoted by name or sold Nucynta before the NDA was approved on November 20, 2008?
No.
So in connection with your work in this case, you did learn about Nucynta, right?
I learned about Nucynta before the case.
Even before, so you're
Yes.
familiar with the medication, correct?
Yes.
Okay, take a look at 2778. I think I'll have to have that in, it is in here? May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may. Thank you.
Thank you.
So 2778 is the product label for Nucynta, and on the first page it will have the indications and usage, right? Right in the upper left-hand corner.
Yes.
And I think we covered this, but indications, what does that mean for purposes of this type of label?
It would mean that Johnson & Johnson is allowed to make the statement that Nucynta is an opioid analgesic indicated for the relief of moderate to severe acute pain in patients 18 years of older. It's what they're allowed to say in terms of appropriate use of their product.
And I think we covered that before a physician, before you would prescribe for the first time Nucynta, after it was approved by the FDA in this fashion, you would want to look at specific product information about that medication, right?
I generally wouldn't prescribe Nucynta, but I don't generally prescribe opioids for the treatment of pain.
But just general matter, if you were, as we talked about before, if you were going to prescribe some medication for the first time, you want to understand the specifics of that particular medication, right?
Yes, yes.
And one way one could do that would be by looking at the FDA-approved product label, right?
Yes, one way would be to look at the package insert.
And you could also look at the physician's desk reference, right?
Yes, you could.
Or you could look at one of those apps that you've described.
Yes,
correct?
it's basically the same information.
And one of the things you'd be looking for would be what the FDA-approved indications and usage for the medication is, right?
You probably already have an idea of the indication before you were looking. If it was the first time you're prescribing a medicine, one of the main reasons a physician would look up the drug is to check the dosing, maybe to check drug interactions if the patient is already on another medicine, hopefully to look at warnings if they're there. But I think generally the indication, your sense that the drug is indicated for the patient in front of you is the reason you're going to look up the drug in the first place. So I think there's already an idea that the drug is indicated for the patient.
Let me change my question, doctor, because I'm trying to stay focused if we can so we can get through this. Would you agree that before a physician prescribes a new medication for a patient, the physician should determine what the FDA-approved indications and usage are for that medication?
I would agree that before a medication is prescribed, the clinician should understand what that drug's indication is.
As approved by the FDA, correct?
The indications are FDA approved, yes.
And in this case, the approved indications and usage read, Nucynta is an opioid analgesic indicated for the relief of moderate to severe acute pain in patients 18 years of age or older, correct?
Yes, that's correct for that period of time in 2008. It did ultimately change, but that's correct.
And so the indication was not for chronic pain, it was for acute pain, right?
That's correct.
And if a physician were prescribing Nucynta for chronic pain, he would be doing that in what's called off-label, right?
That's correct.
So, Nucynta, you take a look, there's been some questioning about opioids in children, and if you look at the use in specific populations in the approved product label here on the right side, on page 1. And what does it say about pediatric use?
Safety and effectiveness not established in patients less than 18 years of age.
When you learned of Nucynta, did you learn that one of the distinguishing features of the tapentadol molecule was that it was believed to have a dual mechanism of action, both a mu opioid agonist and a I'm going to have a tough time pronouncing this. What is it?
Norepinephrine?
Reuptake inhibitor.
Yes.
And you learned that, right?
I'm aware that the drug is said to have both of those effects.
And that was an innovation by Janssen, correct?
My understanding is that Grunenthal or Janssen may have first synthesized the molecule.
And you would agree that it was an innovation, right?
I'm not sure if I would agree that it was an innovation. It was a new molecule. I think innovation would mean that, the world is a better place because this molecule was introduced. I don't know that we have evidence of that. There are lots of pharmaceutical products that have been invented, new molecules synthesized. They are not always an innovation.
Okay, well, in this case, the molecule that was innovated by Janssen allowed pain relief with a lower dosage of opioid, right?
That is a claim that has been made by Johnson & Johnson. I can tell you that claim is not widely accepted.
Okay, well, you don't typically prescribe Nucynta, right?
That's correct.
Okay, let's talk about Nucynta ER. Did you learn in your work in this case that, or even before, Nucynta ER also used the tapentadol molecule as the active pharmaceutical ingredient?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Sure. Did you learn that Nucynta ER, like Nucynta, had as its active pharmaceutical ingredient the tapentadol molecule?
Yes, it's extended-release tapentadol.
So I may have 3736. That'll work. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
So Exhibit 3736 is on stationery of Department of Health and Human Services, Food and Drug Administration, NDA approval, and this one is for Nucynta ER, tapentadol. Your Honor, I move to admit Exhibit J 3736.
The state has no objection with the same caveat that we would object to any discussion of the actual approval process.
J3736 will be admitted into the evidence.
And if you take a look at the second to last paragraph on the first page, the FDA writes, "We have completed our review of this application as amended. It is approved, effective on the date of this letter, for use as recommended in the enclosed agreed-upon labeling text." And you'll see that in the first paragraph, it refers to a new drug application dated November 30, 2009, received December 1, 2009 for Nucynta ER. And if you look at the last page, is there a date that would indicate the date of approval of this NDA?
There's a date on the last page, but it doesn't necessarily indicate the date of the approval. The date on the last page is 2011, and that might be the date of approval. I would need to look more closely.
Well, if you take a look,
This may help. We'll stipulate to the approval date if you know what it is.
yeah, if you look at page 2, I think you'll see that there's an acknowledgement of a submission with the final printed carton and container labels of August 16, 2011. Do you see that?
Yes.
So the date on the last page, August 25, 2011, is just within 9 days of that date. Do you see that?
I do see that.
So that would suggest to you that the August 25, 2011 date is the approval date?
No, I'm not certain that,
Okay, well, we can nail that down, just assuming that's the date for the time being, and we can deal with that later. Have you seen in all the work that you've done in connection with this case, any evidence that Janssen actively marketed by name or sold Nucynta ER prior to August 25, 2011?
no, not by name.
And you saw some unbranded marketing materials, correct?
Yes,
That didn't specifically mention Nucynta ER, right?
that's correct.
Okay, we'll look at those in a bit. And on the indications and usage, let me have you look at Exhibit 2785. I have extra copies here. I'm just not sure if this one is one that's amongst the documents. Oh, that's mine. Yeah, what's your honor?
Thank you.
Okay, and is this on? Okay, so on the first page of Exhibit 2785, it also has the indications and usage, correct?
Yes,
And if we can blow that up, Janice? And the indications and usage here read, Nucynta ER is an opioid agonist indicated for the management of moderate to severe chronic pain in adults and neuropathic pain associated with diabetic peripheral neuropathy in adults, when a continuous around-the-clock opioid analgesic is needed for an extended period of time, correct?
yes, that's
Now,
correct.
And I understand later that there was a change made to this approved indication and use, but at least when the approval was originally given, the NDA was approved, you understand that this was the FDA-approved indication and usage for Nucynta ER, right?
I do.
Okay. And I think you said Nucynta ER used the same tapentadol molecule that Nucynta did, correct?
That's correct.
And did you learn in this, in connection with the work you've done in this case, that Nucynta ER utilized a coating? It's a pill, right?
Yes,
And Nucynta was a pill, right?
yes,
And Nucynta ER utilized a coating that was intended at least to be more difficult to crush.
yes, I think that was the intent.
And the intent of having a pill that's more difficult to crush would be that it would be more difficult for someone who wanted to crush the pill to get the opioid out, to either snort it or inject it, correct?
That's correct.
So in theory, would you agree that's a good thing?
In theory, if all opioids were made hard to crush for snorting or injecting, that would be a good thing.
At least you eliminate that element of potential abuse, right? Or make it more difficult.
It makes it more difficult to snort or inject.
And you take a look at 2785 on page 8. There's actually a specific warning about crushing, chewing, snorting, or injecting the dissolved product, correct?
I'm sorry, what page was that?
Page 8, under warnings and precautions, 5.1, use potential. Just asking you to confirm there's a specific warning there regarding misuse or abuse of Nucynta ER by crushing, chewing, snorting, or injecting the dissolved product, correct?
Yes, that warning is there.
And the warning states that it will result in the uncontrolled delivery of the opioid and pose a significant risk that could result in overdose and death, right?
Yes, it says that.
So when Nucynta ER was approved by the FDA, Janssen also established a REMS for Nucynta ER. Are you aware of that?
There was REMS established for the class of extended-release long-acting opioids, of which Nucynta ER fell into that class. It wasn't established specifically for Nucynta ER.
Well, even before that, isn't it true that Janssen developed a REMS specifically for Nucynta ER?
Not really. The REMS was the same for all extended-release long-acting manufacturers of extended-release long-acting opioids.
Well, let's take a look at some documents. Let me show you what's been marked as Exhibit J1369. Can I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
There's been a lot of discussion about REMS, so probably a good idea to have one we can look at and make sure everybody's clear as to what it is. Exhibit J1369 is called NDA 200533, and Nucynta ER, tapentadol tablets, opioid, analgesic, Janssen Pharmaceuticals, Inc. And Your Honor, I would move for admission, Exhibit J1369.
No objection.
J1369 will be admitted into the evidence.
So you'll see the date of this is August 25, 2011. And in the very beginning, risk evaluation and mitigation strategy, REMS goals, it states right up front, the goals of the Nucynta ER REMS are to inform patients and healthcare professionals about the potential for abuse, misuse, overdose, and addiction to Nucynta ER, and then to inform patients and healthcare professionals about the safe use of Nucynta ER. In connection with the work that you did in reaching your opinions in this case, did you review the REMS that Janssen established for Nucynta ER when it launched the product?
Janssen didn't establish this. The FDA established it. The language in here is pretty much boilerplate. So the Nucynta ER could be swapped in with OxyContin. This was established by the FDA, and I am familiar with the content of these types of REMS documents.
What is my question? Are you certain that the REMS that was established by Janssen on the launch of Nucynta ER was just part of what the FDA mandated for all ER, LA opioids?
So the federal government gave FDA, Congress I believe, gave FDA authority in 2007 to require manufacturers of dangerous medicines to take measures to keep the public safe. And FDA decided to implement a REMS for manufacturers of extended release and long-acting opioids, and it's called the class-wide REMS. It's possible that Nucynta was treated separately, but I believe they were part of the IRLA class-wide REMS.
So you're familiar with the FDA requirements regarding REMS for Schedule II prescription opioids?
Extended-release long-acting, yes.
And your understanding is that in some year, the FDA mandated that all manufacturers of Class II prescription opioids were required to establish a REMS for its products?
Not exactly. I mean, FDA pretty much established it with an industry working group. They worked on it together, and then all of the manufacturers of opioids that fell into that class were then required by FDA to do this.
Your Honor, we would continue our objection that the questions need to be about what RIMs require, not about the approval process of RIMs. That's not alleged in this case, and that's not anything that Dr. Claudia has been disclosed to talk about or was open during her direct examination.
He's testified, Your Honor, that he's familiar with these requirements and that he believes that this document was prepared in accordance with those requirements. So I think I'm entitled to ask him questions about it.
Just to be clear, our objections, we have no problem at all. Don't object to questions about what the RIMs are and what they may or may not require a drug company to do. It's going beyond that into the approval process and all that. That's not.
I sustain the objection.
Thank you.
So just to be clear, is it your testimony that you believe that Janssen was mandated by the FDA to offer a REMS program upon the launch of Nucynta ER?
Same objection. Exactly the question. This is my objection first.
I sustain the objection.
Forget about approval process. Do you know one way or the other whether Janssen worked with the FDA to develop a REMS for Nucynta ER when Nucynta ER was launched?
Same objection.
I think I'm entitled to ask that question, Your Honor. I'm not asking about the approval process. I'm just asking about whether there was a cooperative effort, whether he knows. He may not know, but if he does, I think I'm entitled to probe his knowledge of whether my client worked with the FDA to develop a REMS specifically for this product.
I think the only thing that's proper based on the examination that we've had and all the issues that we've had in this case is what the RIMs do or do not require, what his knowledge of that is. The approval process is not part of this litigation. It's not part of this forum.
Your Honor, I will make an offer of proof that the class-wide requirement for a REMS was not established until June of 2012, and that my client voluntarily worked with the FDA in order to establish this REMS for its launch of this product in order to ensure that patients and physicians had information that would allow them to fully understand the risks and benefits of this drug.
And as much as I would like to respond to that, the state will not have a response to that comment. We will not speak to the approval process unless compelled to do so by the court, which we would deal with.
Well, I sustain Mr. Beckwith's objection and note the offer of proof, and let's move to the next question.
Well, let's look at the REMS document then, Dr. Kolodny. You still have that in front of you?
Yes, I do.
So we looked at the goals, and then if you look under Roman numeral 2, it talks about the REMS elements. Do you see that?
I do.
And the first element, item A, is a medication guide. You see that?
I do.
We'll come back to that. And then element B are elements to assure safe use. Do you see that?
I do.
And then under A, it talks about healthcare professionals who prescribe Nucynta ER will receive training. And then it describes the training that Janssen has ensured will be provided to healthcare professionals who prescribe Nucynta ER. You see that?
I see where it says that, yes.
And then it lists a number of subjects that the training is to address. starting with Romanet I, proper patient selection. Do you see that?
I do.
And then appropriate Nucynta ER dosing and administration, that's Romanet II, right?
Yes.
Romanet III, general principles of safe opioid use, including information about opioid abuse and how to identify patients who are at risk for addiction. See that?
That's what it says.
In Romanet IV, go over to the next page. Potential abuse, misuse, overdose, and addiction from exposure to opioids, including Nucynta ER. You see that?
I see where it says that.
Then Romanet V talks more about risks of Nucynta, including overdose. See that?
I do.
And then Romanet 5.3, the risk of addiction from exposure to Nucynta ER. Do you see that?
I do.
Then if you go back to A, under Roman numeral 2 on the first page, describes a medication guide that's going to be dispensed with each Nucynta ER prescription. Do you see that?
Yes.
And in connection with the work that you've done in connection with this case, did you make any effort to determine whether, in fact, this medication guide is dispensed with each Nucynta ER prescription?
Are you asking whether I've verified that pharmacists give out the medication guide when they dispense?
Correct.
I know that I'm familiar with the medication guide, and I'm familiar with the fact that pharmacists are expected to to provide a medication guide when the medication is dispensed, but I haven't verified, or I have no way to verify whether or not pharmacies do that.
But your understanding is they're required to do that, right?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it's required for a pharmacy to do that or not. I know the intent of the medication guide, FDA's intent, was that when a patient picked up their prescription at a pharmacy, that they would get the medication guide. But I don't know that the FDA can make pharmacies do that. I'm not sure.
Maybe the question is better framed just, do you have evidence that the medication guide wasn't dispensed as indicated here?
I don't have evidence that it was or wasn't.
So let's keep going. If you look at page 2, item B. And I guess before we get there, why don't you look at page 5. This is Appendix 1, medication guide. And if you just flip through that, you'll see that this is the medication guide that was being referred to on the first page of the REMS. You see that?
Yes.
Did you review this medication guide in connection with the work you did in arriving at your opinions in this case?
I don't recall reviewing this specific medication guide.
Did you review any Nucynta ER medication guides in connection with the work you did in forming your opinions in this case?
I don't recall reviewing a medication guide for Nucynta ER.
So let's take a look back at B on page 2. And you'll see there that Janssen indicates that it will ensure that within 3 weeks after approval of the Nucynta ER REMS, a Dear Healthcare Professional letter will be mailed to prescribers most experienced in treating chronic pain with opioid agonists, including pain specialists, psychiatrists, and primary care physicians. This letter is designed to convey and reinforce the risk of abuse, misuse, overdose, and addiction of Nucynta ER, as well as the need to complete the Nucynta ER REMS education program. This letter will be available on the Janssen Pharmaceuticals, Inc. website for a time period of 1 year from the date of the mailing. In connection with the work that you've done in this case in reaching your opinions, did you review the Dear Healthcare Professional letter that Janssen mailed to healthcare professionals in connection with the Nucynta ER REMS?
I might have, I don't recall reviewing it though.
Did you see any evidence in connection with all the work you've done in this case in arriving at your expert opinions that such a letter was not sent to healthcare professionals?
No.
Take a look at, back at page 1 if you would. Actually go to page 6. Let's take a quick look at the medication guide. And you'll see at the very start, there's a box with a message, important. Keep Nucynta ER in a safe place away from children. Accidental use by a child is a medical emergency and can result in death. If the child accidentally takes Nucynta ER, get emergency help right away. But then it basically instructs the reader to read the medication guide that comes with Nucynta ER before you start taking it, and each time you get a new prescription, etc. And then it indicates what is the most important information I should know about Nucynta ER. It has information that follows. So if you look at, we won't go over all of them, but if you take a look at page 4, actually page 3. And this would be right under item F. Prescribers will be retrained every 2 years or following substantial changes to the Nucynta ER REMS. And in connection with all the work you did in this case in arriving at your expert opinions, did you see any evidence that Janssen did not retrain prescribers every 2 years or following substantial changes to Nucynta ER REMS?
I haven't seen evidence that you, or that Janssen did or did not train or retrain. The educational component of REMS is completely voluntary.
Did you make any effort to determine whether Janssen did or did not?
No, I didn't.
Okay, look at page 4. Actually down at the bottom of page 3, item D, you'll see that Janssen is indicating it's going to submit REMS assessments to the FDA every 6 months for the first year from the date of approval of the REMS and annually thereafter. In connection with your work as an expert in this case and reaching your expert opinions, did you review the REMS assessments that Janssen submitted to the FDA regarding Nucynta ER?
No.
Okay, let me see. Let me go back to what we were trying to talk about a little bit earlier when I was asking you about the difference between an addiction rate. Is this him? And the risks for a particular individual. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
And believe we were talking about how a physician should try to evaluate risk for a particular individual when the physician is considering prescribing an opioid for the treatment of chronic pain. And if you look at Exhibit 2774, this is the FDA-approved product label for Duragesic. And if you take a look at page 11, and if we could pull that up, may it publish, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. It's 5.1 on page 11. And in the second paragraph, it states, although the risk of addiction in any individual is unknown, would you agree with that?
Yes.
It can occur in patients appropriately prescribed Duragesic. You would agree with that, right?
Yes,
And in those who obtain the drug illicitly. Again, you'd agree with that, right?
I would.
And this warning label is, this product label, this warning and precaution then goes on in the next paragraph. Assess each patient's risk for opioid addiction, abuse, or misuse prior to prescribing Duragesic. And you would agree that a physician should do that before prescribing an opioid to a patient, right?
With the caveat that we don't really have a good way to do that. There are some patients, like I mentioned, children, adolescents, who may be at greater risk of becoming opioid addicted. But in general, for adults with repeated exposure of a highly addictive drug, almost anybody can become addicted. And you know, the problem is that we don't really have a good way to do this.
My question is more direct, okay? And that is, do you agree that a physician should attempt to assess the risk to a particular individual before prescribing an opioid to that individual for treatment of chronic pain?
But yeah, before any medication to any patient is prescribed, a clinician should weigh the risks versus benefits for that particular patient.
I'm
Yes.
talking specifically now about opioids, okay? So let's
Yes,
stay on.
certainly, and that would include opioids.
I'm not asking about everything else, I'm asking about opioids, okay? And are you telling me that well, I know you don't prescribe these drugs on a regular basis, so let's not ask that question. I know that's not what you do. But if a physician was a pain management doctor and was considering whether to prescribe an opioid to a patient for treatment of chronic pain, do you think the physician should try to make an effort to evaluate the patient to determine what kind of risk factors exist in trying to evaluate what risk they have of opioid addiction, abuse, or misuse?
That's sort of tricky to answer because when deciding whether or not a medication should be prescribed, you have to consider the risks and the potential benefits, and so they're done together.
Shouldn't they do that?
Yes.
Okay, so in here, isn't the FDA, in this FDA-approved product label, saying risks are increased in patients with a personal or family history of substance abuse, including drug or alcohol addiction or abuse, or mental illness, e.g. major depression? Do you disagree with the statement approved by the FDA as to risks being increased in those types of patients?
I think that a patient, for example, with major depressive disorder, prescribing them an opioid is riskier because if someone's depressed and they're taking a drug that makes them feel good, they may be at greater risk for addiction. So I do think that some types of mental illnesses do put patients at greater risk for becoming opioid addicted. I think a personal history of addiction could increase your risk. I'm not sure, though, about the family history when it comes to opioids. I think family history is important with alcohol addiction. I'm not sure that family history is that important with addiction to highly addictive drugs. For example, probably a large portion of the US population has a grandparent who was addicted to nicotine. That doesn't mean that they have nicotine addiction. Cultural factors played a role. It was with repeated use of a highly addictive drug, genetics play less of a role. But I do agree with some of the other content here.
We're talking about opioids, not tobacco. And would you agree that a physician, considering the prescription of an opioid for a patient, should consider the risk factors identified in this statement approved by the FDA?
Yes.
Okay. And you would expect a physician who's determining whether or not to prescribe an opioid to do that, right?
I would expect the clinician to weigh the risks versus the benefits for a patient.
Including the risks that are identified in this warning and precaution, right?
Weigh those risks against the potential benefit. If you're talking about using extended release tapentadol for low back pain, or for chronic headache, or for fibromyalgia, none of these risks are worth taking because the benefit side of that equation is so poor. If you don't have evidence that a medication is going to help a patient, then the risks are not worth taking.
I understand that's your strongly held personal view, doctor, but let's look at what the FDA approved here in the next sentence. The potential for these risks should not, however, prevent the prescribing of Duragesic for the proper management of pain in any, what's the word?
Given patient.
Given patient. So let's go back to Janssen's products. I apologize we didn't have that at the time we first covered it. You mentioned during your testimony from time to time Ultram and Ultracet, right?
Yes,
Those are not Schedule II opioids, right?
that's correct.
So when you were showing us the chart of sales of opioids, were they included or not?
I'm guessing that because they were not scheduled, and that was data from the International Narcotics Control Board. If you're talking about the oxycodone versus USA,
All of these charts
all of
that
these
you've
charts,
been putting
yeah.
up for the last
I
3 days.
probably.
Your Honor, I object to that. He's asking for clarification. There were charts that him and Lee, one of the epidemiologists put up from the state versus ones like 906 or the ones that their expert, Dr. Fong and Dr. Claude, both provided the same one. So I think we just asked for clarification.
Yeah, please clarify.
I would agree they're confusing. So look at S1223. And
Do I have S1223?
you know, I don't know, doctor, so if I may approach her one?
You may.
Okay.
Thank you.
I believe this already in evidence. So if we may publish, Your Honor?
Yes.
So we've looked at this before. I don't think we need to go over it much other than take a look at page 12. I think that's a chart we've seen before, correct?
Yes.
And you actually used this data, did you not, in the 2015 article that you co-wrote with Mr. Courtwright, among others, right?
Dr. Courtwright, yes.
I'm sorry, doctor, I didn't mean that intentionally. I don't know if he's watching. Dr. Courtwright, I apologize. Dr. Courtwright. There's some lawyers who call themselves doctors. I don't think that's appropriate. Doctors, real doctors. So, so in this particular chart, does it include, well, let me back up first. Ultram and Ultracet, the molecule is called tramadol, right?
That's correct.
And tramadol is not a Schedule II opioid, right?
That's correct.
It's weaker than the Schedule II opioids, right?
That's correct.
And it indicated usage is not for chronic pain, right?
I'm not certain. I don't think it has a, I'm not certain about that. I think there is Ultram, I believe there's a tramadol extended release product that might have an indication for pain when more than a few days or round-the-clock treatment is necessary. I'm not certain though.
Can I get the Ultracet label? You had given some testimony about a couple of things about these products. One, you had given some testimony that was critical of my client for lobbying the Board of Pharmacy here in Oklahoma in opposition to the scheduling of tramadol. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, I think that was the wrong thing for your client to do.
Okay. Were you there when that presentation was made?
No, I've seen some of the data, though, that the Radars folks used in states in trying to convince them not to put tramadol into a more restrictive category.
In connection with the work that you've done in this case, did you come to learn that an individual named Bruce Collagen made a presentation to the Oklahoma Board of Pharmacy?
That's not the name that I recall. I think it was Ted Cicero.
Well, did you read the actual testimony of Bruce Collagen that was presented to the Oklahoma Board of Pharmacy on the issue of the scheduling of tramadol?
I don't recall. I don't think I did, but I don't recall.
So you did not read, I take it, his sworn testimony about Gary Vorzanger and Ted Cicero's presentation of clinical information, correct? Actually, did you read the Collagen? I may be a little confused. Did you read the Collagen deposition in this case?
No, I didn't. When you said testimony, I thought you meant testimony in front of the state board.
What did you review?
To learn about the SWAT team, it was the discovery.
We saw an email.
Yes.
Okay. Did you listen to the tapes of the presentations that were made to the Board of Pharmacy?
No, what in reviewing the emails and documents obtained on discovery, what I reviewed were PowerPoint presentations that were shown to states across the country by the Radars group to try and convince states not to put tramadol in, not to schedule tramadol. Johnson & Johnson wanted it to remain unscheduled.
I'm asking specifically about Oklahoma, sir, and I would appreciate it if you'd answer my question. Did you review, did you listen to any of the tapes of the presentations that were made to the Oklahoma Board of Pharmacy about the scheduling of tramadol?
No, I didn't.
Did you review any transcripts of the presentations that were made to the Oklahoma Board of Pharmacy about tramadol?
No, I did not.
Did you review any minutes from the Oklahoma Board of Pharmacy regarding its consideration of the scheduling of tramadol?
I can't. It's possible. I can't recall.
Another comment you made about tramadol involved, I believe, a call note, which you interpreted as in a sales representative talking to a doctor about using, I think you said, Ultram for spring break. Do you recall that testimony?
I think I do. I think I know what you're referring to.
Did you review the actual call note?
I believe we had the call note up on the screen.
And did you only review it on the screen, or did you actually look at the hard copy?
I looked at a very thick printout of call notes, and the language in that printout was pretty much the same that went on the
So did you
screen.
review that call note in hard copy format
Ye-
before you saw it on the screen?
Yes, I saw it as a printout.
And do you recall that the product that was involved was not Ultram, but Ultraset?
I'm not exactly certain which call note you're referring to.
The one that talked about spring break that you testified to, Doctor?
There were-
Do
there-
you have that in mind?
There were, I recall multiple call notes mentioning spring break strains and sprains, and so I don't, yeah.
And did you pay attention to them as to what product the sales rep was discussing with the doctor in those visits?
I think it was Ultram.
Okay. Sure about that?
No, it'd be helpful if we could take a look at those call notes.
Well, coming in and getting that testimony, you're saying you're not sure now whether it's Ultram or it's Ultraset, is that right?
I object. What Dr. Clottey said is he reviewed, I think, dozens. So if there's a specific one, I would ask it to be shown.
Objection sustained.
Well, let's take a look at, do you know what Ultraset is approved for, what its indication is?
Probably moderate to severe pain it would depend on the time frame. I'm guessing that it was moderate to severe pain, but I'm not certain.
Moderate, severe, acute pain, correct?
I'd have to see the indication. I'm not certain.
Okay, may I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
It's not. I'm just going to have the witness review this initially to see if it refreshes his recollection.
That's not on your exhibit list. We object, Your Honor. It's another attempt to bring something out in time. There's no exhibit sticker on it. Counsel is
Your Honor, you have to have an actual exhibit listed to be able to refresh somebody's recollection if they say they don't have a memory of something.
Your Honor.
So I can ask the witness, and if it refreshes his memory, then he can testify to that.
They had a
There's
motion
no-
of limine about tramadol. They said they didn't want us talking about it as a case. They lost that. They knew this was an issue in the case. I do not believe that this was on their exhibit list.
May we approach, Your Honor?
Can I make a suggestion? Your Honor? If we take our afternoon recess now, we may be able to resolve this, because I believe another version of this may have come in. I'm not 100% certain, which is why I suggest that we address it on the recess.
It's 3 o'clock anyway, so yeah, we'll take a break till 3:20.
call note that you gave some testimony. The campaign that you saw described in that call note was not a campaign to promote Ultram or Ultraset for spring break. It was a campaign for the spring to promote the use for breaks, sprains, and strains, wasn't it?
I'm not sure.
Because all you know is what you saw in that call note, right?
Yeah, I
You
thought,
didn't see any description of that in a deposition, right?
I didn't see it in, I don't think I reviewed a deposition that discussed that.
You didn't see any literature about it, right?
I might have, I might have seen something about, I'm not sure if it was just the call notes. I think I might have seen reference to spring breaks or spring break. I may not have noticed the distinction. If it said spring breaks, that is different from spring break.
Meaning breaks in the spring, right?
Right.
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 Okay, now, if I told you that that reference was to Ultraset, would you have any reason to dispute it?
The spring breaks, sprains, and strains was a campaign focused on Ultraset. Is that the?
The spring campaign for breaks, sprains, and strains dealt with Ultraset. Would you have any reason to dispute
I
that?
would not.
Okay, may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Let me hand you what's been marked as exhibit, or has already been admitted as exhibit 444.
Thank you.
And you'll see this is the approved product label for Ultraset, correct?
Yes.
And do you see, may we publish, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
And do you see where there is a description of the FDA-approved indications and usage for Ultraset?
Yes, I do.
And starts at the bottom of the lower, on the column to the left and continues on to the top of the right. Maybe we can just blow up the description at the top right column. And what is the indicated, the indications in usage for Ultraset? You just read that.
Acute pain severe enough to require an opioid analgesic and for which alternative treatments are inadequate.
Thank you. So we talked about Nucenta ER, quickly gone over Ultram and Ultraset, but let's talk about Duragesic, because you spent a lot of time talking about that. Duragesic is a fentanyl patch, correct?
That's correct.
And do you agree that there is a benefit to having an opioid medication that comes in the form of a fentanyl patch?
Yes, I can think of cases where it might be helpful.
And are you aware, through the work that you've done in this case and arriving at your expert opinions, that the FDA-approved product label for Duragesic has always included a warning that it may be habit-forming?
I don't, the habit-forming language, I don't recall seeing on Duragesic labels. I'm not saying that it's not there, but
Let me ask this. Maybe this is the way to go about it. In connection with your work in this case, in arriving at your opinions that you've offered here in court, did you review the FDA-approved product labels for Duragesic?
yes, I did.
Okay. So let me have you take a look at J2762. And if I might approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
So if you take a look at the very first page, and maybe publish, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Right up at the top, the very first warning, what does it say?
Maybe habit forming.
And if you take a look at page 5, you'll see at the top, there are the FDA-approved indications and usage for Duragesic, at least in this approved product label, correct?
Not sure. Does this say it's an approved product label? I saw it said 1990 on the back.
We can establish that through someone else. Look at the document, though.
Okay.
Doctor, and it indicates that Duragesic is indicated in the management of chronic pain in patients requiring opioid analgesia. Do you see that?
I see where it says that.
And in the course of the work that you did in connection with this case and arriving at your expert opinions, and in particular, your review of the FDA-approved product labels for Duragesic, did you learn that when the FDA initially approved the marketing and sale of Duragesic, it did so for management of chronic pain?
Yeah, I am aware. I think this is chronic pain in malignancy is what they were really referring to, and it's what that said on another old label.
Does it say in this indications and usage chronic pain for cancer patients?
Didn't need to. In 1990, if you were going to put
I'm just asking if this did.
it didn't.
Take a look at Exhibit 2769.
Do I have that?
I will give it to you. Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
And Your Honor, this one's admitted, so
You may
we may
publish.
publish it?
Yes.
So you'll see on this FDA-approved product label, indications and usage. You can turn to page 9. And if we can blow that up. And there's a fair amount here, but just starting at the beginning. Duragesic is indicated for management of persistent, moderate to severe chronic pain that requires continuous, around-the-clock opioid administration for an extended period of time and cannot be managed by other means, such as non-steroidal analgesics, opioid combination products, or immediate release opioids. Does that say that the indicated usage is limited to treatment of cancer patients, Dr. Klotny?
No, it does not say that.
And if you look at the next paragraph, Duragesic should only be used in patients who are already receiving opioid therapy, who have demonstrated opioid tolerance. Let me just stop there. So when it says Duragesic should only be used in patients who are already receiving opioid therapy, meaning they've already been prescribed an opioid, right?
And currently taking it with a tolerance.
Right. So this indicated usage is saying basically that according to the FDA, the approved usage would be for someone who's already taking an opioid, right?
That is what it says.
Okay. And not only that, that they've demonstrated opioid tolerance, right?
Yes.
And what is opioid tolerance?
Basically what you said, that they're already taking an opioid, and if you're taking an opioid for more than a couple of days, you very quickly start becoming tolerant, meaning that the same dose will have less of an effect.
So are you aware of the difference in an FDA-approved label between the indications and usage section and the highlights section?
Somewhat.
And are you intending to testify here about the legal difference between the indications of use section and the highlights section?
I don't think I'm going to testify on legal matters.
Yesterday, I believe it was, you offered some criticism about Janssen offering coupons for physicians to use or to provide to patients in obtaining, filling a prescription for Duragesic, correct?
Yes.
And a coupon in that context doesn't allow a patient to go out and get the prescription filled, to get the drug without a prescription from the physician, right?
The patient had to have a prescription and a coupon.
Right. So the coupon doesn't give the patient the product unless the physician has written a prescription for the patient, right?
Yes.
And in giving that prescription to the patient, presumably, the doctor is making that individualized assessment of benefits and risks in doing that, right?
Hopefully the doctor is weighing risk versus benefit well. I mean, if that doctor was being detailed by Johnson & Johnson, I think there's evidence that the doctor would not be able to do that well because your sales reps were giving that doctor misinformation. In effect, your client was putting its finger on the scale so that the doctor was not able to weigh risks versus benefits well. But in an ideal situation, the doctor would be able to do that.
One of my questions, sir. Okay, let's stick with the questions I'm asking, and that is, if a doctor were to give a patient a coupon, the patient still would not be able to get the drug without a prescription from the physician, correct?
Yes.
And what the coupon does is not allow the patient to go out on the street and get the drug, but instead they have to go to the pharmacy with their prescription to get that prescription filled, right?
That's true.
And that would be based upon a prescription written by a physician, right?
That is true.
And your issue is that you think, for various reasons you've testified to, doctors were over-prescribing opioid drugs, right? Isn't that your opinion?
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again?
Isn't it your opinion, I thought we heard it many times over the course of the last several days, that because of a marketing campaign that you described, you believe that physicians were over-prescribing opioids?
Yes, I believe that the medical community, clinicians have been over-prescribing opioids because of unbranded and branded and direct marketing to physicians. And I think we have evidence of that.
I'm just asking you if that was
Yes.
the opinion, doctor. I'm not trying to ask you to give the long answer that you gave in your direct testimony, okay?
Sure.
So let's break it down. Does the FDA allow coupons to be given to patients for pharmaceutical products?
Apparently,
It's not prohibited, is it?
I don't know.
And the coupon would allow a patient to be able to obtain the medication for less money, correct?
In the case of the coupon we discussed, for free.
Right. And you agree that these medications, at least in certain circumstances, I know you have a disagreement as to the scope of that, but can be essential for patients, correct?
Yes, sometimes opioids are essential medicines.
And you certainly understand that there are some people in this country and in the state of Oklahoma who may not have the money to afford an essential medication like an opioid, correct?
Yes, I think there are patients who might not be able to afford a medication.
So are you opposed to measures that would allow patients to obtain essential medications when they might not otherwise be able to afford it?
Well, the reason that I had concerns is because the physicians who were being given these coupons.
Wasn't my
and-
question,
Well, I
Doctor.
can't answer you, the question you've asked me, I don't think I can give you a yes or no answer to. If the physicians who had been giving out the coupons really understood the risks versus the benefits of the drug, I would have less of a problem with it. But we saw overwhelming evidence that Johnson & Johnson's sales force was giving incorrect information to these same prescribers who were getting the coupon. The same prescribers were being told that Duragesic had a low abuse potential, and they're getting the coupon.
Doctor?
That's the problem.
We've heard that before. I'm trying to probe with my questions. And you would agree that before a doctor is prescribing one of my client's drugs, they should, if they're doing their job right, familiarize themselves with the product indications and usages, correct?
That's correct.
With the warnings of the risks and potential misuse, correct?
That's correct.
With the information that they would need to look to either the approved warning labels, product literature, or some other source that would provide them that specific information, correct?
Yes, and if your sales force had stuck to what was
You've
in that
answered my
label, we
question,
wouldn't
sir.
be here.
Your Honor, I move to strike that as non-responsive. The witness is not fairly answering my questions but going beyond them, so I would move to strike that.
I object to the motion and the cutting off of witnesses. This witness is here under penalty of perjury, and when he says he cannot answer something yes or no, he should not be required to answer falsely. That is improper.
He answered the question, yes, Your Honor. And then he went on to go beyond it in something that was not responsive to the question that I was asking. It's one thing if he can't answer a question, yes or no, but when he answers a question, yes, and then he goes on, as he just did, that's improper, and it should be stricken.
I disagree, I overrule.
Look at Exhibit 2769, if you would, again. This is the FDA-approved warning label for Duragesic, and if you can take a look at pages 9 and 10.
I'm sorry, which page?
Pages 9 and 10. And we took a look at the beginning of this. When you look at that top indication,
Yes.
does it say that Duragesic is approved for everyday use?
I don't see that there, no.
Look at page 1. Do you see that?
I'm sorry,
Down at the bottom?
the words everyday use?
This is part of the box warning, correct?
I'm looking at the box warning.
And you look down at the bottom,
Yes.
the bold and underlined, because serious or life-threatening hypoventilation could occur, Duragesic fentanyl transdermal system is contraindicated. And what does the fourth bullet say?
It's contraindicated in the management of mild pain,
And what does the fifth bullet point say?
in the management of intermittent pain.
And what's the example?
For example, use on an as-needed basis, PRN.
Which is contraindicated, correct?
Yes, that would be true for all extended-release opioids.
Including this one, right?
Yes,
Okay. Now, you testified, I believe it was yesterday, that by the year 2004, the United States was in the midst, those were your words, of an epidemic of opioid addiction. Remember that testimony?
yes,
And you testified that by 2006, it was very clear that the increase in prescribing of opioids was fueling an overdose death problem, that prescriptions and deaths had risen in parallel. And that was your testimony as well, correct?
yes, and that's what I believe.
And you had testified, I think the day before, that in 2006, reports had come out from the CDC showing an increase, an enormous increase, I think as you put it, in deaths relating to opioid use, correct?
Correct.
And I believe you also testified that at least by 2007, there was press coverage of issues with Purdue Pharmaceutical, correct?
No, I think I testified much earlier that there was press coverage in beginning in the late 90s, early 2000s about problems with OxyContin.
Okay, so even earlier than 2007,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So all of that, certainly by 2007, right?
Yes,
So I want you to take a look at one of the charts that you've utilized in your testimony. It's Exhibit 1223. I think we've already passed that out.
Yeah, we have
Find
it.
that.
I've got an extra copy, Mr. Yoder, if you want one.
I think we'll find it here at some point.
Well, I've gotten two from you, so you may have accidentally given me yours.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And if you look at page 12, this is one of the charts that you referred to in your testimony, correct?
yes, I believe so.
And this is a chart that was included in this publication by the CDC in November of 2011, right?
I believe so, yes.
And it shows the three lines, the top line OPR sales, the middle line OPR deaths, and then the bottom broken line treatment admissions, correct?
That's correct.
So this chart, when you look at it, kind of consistent with your testimony, where you see that, just look at OPR deaths, and OPR, again, what does that stand for?
Opioid pain reliever.
Opioid pain reliever deaths. That is the solid blue line, correct?
Yes,
And you see that from 1999 through 2007, I think your description was it increased substantially, right?
yes.
Okay. Now, take a look, if you would, at Exhibit S2400.
Can you describe that one?
Pardon?
Will you describe that one so we can find it?
2400, I have extra copies if I may approach you on them.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
is the fatal unintentional poisoning surveillance system data update from Ms. Nguyen, who testified here. And you'll see this data goes through 2016, right?
Yes, yes.
And that, again, is another source of information that you utilize in connection with your testimony here, right?
That's correct.
And if you look at page 14 of Exhibit 2400, that has the chart that we've seen before that shows in the blue bars the death rate for the period 2000 to 2016 for unintentional opioid-related overdose death rates in Oklahoma, right?
Yes,
And this was a chart, again, you used in connection with your testimony, right?
yes,
And you'll see by looking at this chart, just like the CDC chart, although this starts in the year 2000, there's a substantial increase starting in 2000 through 2007, right?
yes.
Almost, what, 6 times? Am I doing my math right?
Not sure.
Goes from a little over 2 to almost to 12, right?
There's a substantial increase.
And then the top year, according to this chart, was actually 2009, right?
Yes, though it might not be statistically significant.
Right. Well, whether it's statistically significant or not, do you agree that on this chart that you relied upon, the top year for unintentional opioid-related overdose deaths was the year 2009?
Yes, though not statistically significant. It's the highest bar on this graph, but really from around 2008 through around 2013, I would really characterize the death rate as staying pretty stable.
Okay, so the real growth was up through 2008, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. We're fine with that. Are you a statistician?
No, I'm not.
So we've already established that you've not seen any evidence that Janssen actively marketed by name or sold Nucynta before November 20, 2008, and that it did not do so for Nucynta ER at any time before August 25, 2011. So we have prepared a demonstrative. For what? So we've taken these bars off this chart from Exhibit 2400, showing the death rate. And what we've done is we've put on them the marketing and sale of Nucynta from mid-2009 and the marketing and sale of Nucynta from 2011. And Mr. Beckworth likes to ask the question that something happened in this period of time. You've heard that, haven't you?
In which period of time? The
The
period.
period of time leading up to 2008, 2009. Something happened to cause that substantial increase up through that period of time. You've been here when he's done that, haven't you?
Right, I think I heard him say there was a nothing and then there was a something.
Something
Yes.
happened, right?
Yes.
And we're looking at this chart, and it wasn't the active promotion and sale of Nucynta or Nucynta ER, was it? And I know you're going to talk about unbranded marketing, and we'll go to that. But we get to break it up in chunks. So if you just answer my question.
Your Honor, I object. That may be the most improper question I've ever heard in a court of law. He is telling the witness not to tell the truth and not to talk about their 2-year campaign that preceded 2009 that was literally called by Kim D. Neshman a hook.
Your Honor,
This has got to stop.
Your Honor, I'm entitled to break it up and get straight answers to my questions.
Lawyers,
And we've seen what Dr. Kolodny will do, and I should be able to get a straight answer to my question initially. Then we can debate whether he gets to go on beyond that, but I should at least get a straight answer to my question.
Your Honor, if I may, trials are about revealing the truth, not hiding them. That's why we have this crisis.
Your Honor, this is,
So improper.
may we approach
I'm
him?
going to overrule the objection, and
Thank you.
I understand Mr. Beckworth may reassert it. He also will have an opportunity to redirect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you please repeat the question?
Let me make sure I have it. Would you agree that Jansen's marketing and sale by name of Nucenta and Nucenta ER did not cause the increase in unintentional prescription drug-related overdose deaths in Oklahoma up through the year 2009?
I would agree that the branded marketing began at the height of the opioid addiction epidemic.
It wasn't my question. Okay, my question is very specific, and we'll get to other things too, but we gotta take it in chunks. Would you agree that Jansen's marketing and sale of the Nucenta brand and the Nucenta ER brand did not cause the increase in unintentional prescription drug-related overdose deaths in Oklahoma up through 2009?
And I object, the word he used was marketing, and unbranded is part of marketing, which is why I had the other objection earlier. It's intentionally misleading, so.
My question
I
relates
overrule.
to the brand. Thank you.
The branded marketing, I have no reason to doubt what you put on this slide, that the branded marketing began where you've listed it.
It doesn't answer my question. Let me try again. Would you agree that Jansen's marketing and sale of its Nucenta and Nucenta ER brands did not cause the increase, you called substantial increase, in unintentional prescription drug-related overdose deaths in Oklahoma up through the year 2009?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, I want to go back to the chart that we were looking at in Exhibit 1223. And I want you to look at, if you would, Exhibit S0906, which is a state exhibit that I understand Your Honor's been admitted. May we publish it?
Yes, you may.
Running a little ahead of you, Janice, I know, but you do a great job keeping up.
Just a minute. A couple of minutes ago, you had a demonstrative.
Yes, you want to mark that, Your
I think
Honor?
we need to mark that Court Exhibit 65.
And I think we have copies.
If not, if you can just make a copy for the state and a copy for me, and we'll make sure.
And
mark
what
that
number
as
then, Your Honor?
Court's Exhibit 65.
Okay.
You can go ahead.
So, now this is a chart that you created, right?
No.
Who created it?
I reprinted it in a journal article. This is, the CDC created it.
The CDC created. Well, let me take a look at your journal article. Do you know what it is? Okay. So, may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm going to hand you State 3138.
Thank you.
Is this the article that you're referring to?
Yes, it is.
And if you take a look at the article on page 2. I'm sorry, page 3. So it shows this chart, and is this the same chart that is on S0906?
Yes, and I think it's the same one we were looking at in the MMWR.
Now, when I look at exhibit S1223, I see the OPR sales numbers that go through 2009, or 10, I guess. I see the OPR death numbers that go through, looks like 2008. And then I see the OPR treatment admissions numbers. It looks like it goes through 2009. So do you agree that exhibit S1223, the CDC chart, only provides the death information through 2008 and the death information through 2009? You see that?
Oh, yes.
Is there information in exhibit S1223 that actually fills in that gap, that tells us what the other 2 years are for OPR deaths or the other 2 years for treatment admissions?
I guess that the chart that appears in my paper, we can see what source 10 was for the paper, has a little bit, maybe a slightly more updated than this one.
That's what I'm trying to find out.
I think so.
So we'll just take it in chunks again, okay?
Yes.
Right now, I'm just asking about exhibit S1223, okay?
Yes.
And my question is whether there is data in exhibit S1223 that fills in the missing information for the last 2 years for OPR deaths and the last year of treatment admissions.
Yes.
And where is that data?
I'm not sure.
Can you point it to me in this exhibit?
So I'm not sure I understand your question.
Trying to find out where you got the missing information from that shows up in your article on page 3 that's not on the CDC chart on exhibit S1223. So I'm just saying, is that data here somewhere? It's just not in the chart.
I'm not sure. So I'm not sure why they're different. I think there's got to be an error somewhere because the source for my chart is this document, but my chart is not identical. So there is a difference. I'm not sure why there's a difference.
Well, that's what we're trying to find out, because you agree your chart is different than the CDC chart, right?
It does look, my chart looks different. I thought they were the same chart, but it does look like, it looks like the chart in my paper was updated. So my best guess is that the additional data came from SAMHSA for treatment admissions, and for deaths would have come from the CDC.
Okay, well, we have a demonstrative that I think will help identify what I'm asking about here. And so the particular information that we're talking about would be, and this is looking at the chart, and see if we find it. We have a glitch. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
So, what we're talking about is just, the information for deaths and admissions here in 2009 and 2010, right?
Correct.
So, if you look at your article, I don't know, are we frozen? Do we have a minute, Your Honor?
Yeah, that's
To
fine.
see if we can fix the
Fine.
technical issue here. No? Yeah, is it just that one? Just that one? Okay, well, hopefully it's just that one, Your Honor, so. Um, So if you look at your chart in your article, it's Exhibit 3138, page 3, if that one comes up. So that, and can we blow that up? So that actually completes those lines through 2010, right?
Yes, it looks like it was updated.
And you're saying that you think that additional information came from the CDC and from SAMHSA?
It's possible we were citing a that we used a more current CDC source, but we listed the older CDC source. Or it's possible we obtained the more current data and gave it to the publisher. But it is slightly more current than this chart is.
Well, this article was written in what year?
I believe it was published in 2015.
And this data goes through what year?
That chart is through 2010
So your article is
or
written...
2011.
Looks like
2010,
to me.
yes.
So your article is written 5 years after the most recent of this data, correct?
I object to that, the difference between written and published. So, did you ask me about published and
And
written?
asked about published then. This article was published in January of 2015, right?
I believe so.
That's what it says on the first page.
I would believe that.
Any reason to disbelieve?
No.
Okay. And that's 5 years, 4 or 5 years after the most recent data that you're showing in this chart that you're including in this published article, correct?
It's correct that the publication date is 5 years after 2010.
Okay? And I take it that the reason you're using data that the most recent of which is 4 to 5 years old is that, was that the most recent data available to you?
I think so. I'm not certain. We began working on this paper in 2013. I'm not certain why it would end at that point.
But it did, right?
It did.
And if we take a look at S0906, I don't know if this helps or not, but this chart actually has some additional information on it that you didn't have in your article, and this is the chart that was created for purposes of this case, right?
No, I don't think this was created for purposes of this case. I think this is a slide that was shown, that I've shown before, that I believe I made from this chart, or maybe it was vice versa, I'm not sure.
Okay, but this is the same chart, for the most part, as the chart in the article, right?
I believe so, yes.
But in this chart, in the lower left-hand corner, you're actually referencing the CDC, right?
That's correct. It's referencing CDC, but that's an incorrect reference because there's more updated information than was in the CDC paper.
So did you notice that that was incorrect when you were testifying to this chart in court?
Before today, I had no idea that there was that error. This is the first time I've learned of it.
What's clear is that this chart ends in 2010, right?
Yes, that's clear.
We have data available now that's more recent than 2010, correct?
That's correct.
Were you here when Claire Lynn testified?
I was.
Did you hear her testimony?
I did.
And you know that she administers the fatal unintentional poisoning surveillance system for the state of Oklahoma, right?
I do.
And that's part of the Oklahoma Department of Health.
I believe so.
And that system tracks and publishes data regarding unintentional poisoning deaths, right?
I believe so.
She testified to a document J3928, if we can pull that up. May I approach, Ron?
Yes, you may. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you're familiar with this document, right?
I believe so.
It's one of the documents that you reviewed in connection with the work you did in this case in arriving at your opinions, right?
That's correct.
And if we take a look at page 5, may I publish on it?
Yes, you may.
Similar to what we were looking at before, deaths involving prescription drugs, illicit drugs, or alcohol by year of death, unintentional poisoning, Oklahoma, 2007 to 2017, right?
Yes.
And the yellow line on this chart represents the deaths involving prescription drugs, right?
Yes, it does.
And you agree with me that really from 2009 to 2013, I think you've already testified to this, the number of the deaths involving prescription drugs remained relatively flat.
What I testified, I think yesterday too, was that in Oklahoma we bent the curve. That Oklahoma is one of the few states where prescription opioid overdose deaths have started to come down in parallel with the decrease in prescribing.
My question was a little bit different. I'm just asking you a pretty simple factual question, and I thought you already testified to it. And that is that from 2009 to 2013, the deaths involving prescription drugs in Oklahoma stayed relatively flat.
That's correct.
And then would you agree that starting in 2014, the deaths from prescription drugs in Oklahoma have declined?
I would agree with that.
Now, that is the period of time when my clients Nucenta and Nucenta ER brands were being actively marketed and sold, correct?
I'm sorry, if you could refresh my memory,
2008
Yes.
for Nucynta, 2011 for Nucynta ER.
yes, they were being released during that plateau in deaths at an extremely high level.
My question, doctor, isn't it true that during the years 2009 through 2013 in the state of Oklahoma, the number when Nucynta and Nucynta ER were launched by my client, the deaths in Oklahoma involving prescription drugs stayed relatively flat?
They were not increasing during that period of time, yes.
And isn't it true that starting in 2014, when my clients' Nucynta and Nucynta ER brands were being actively marketed and sold, the number of deaths in Oklahoma involving prescription drugs declined?
There is a decline in deaths involving prescription opioids that begins around 2013.
Right. You agree then, correct?
Yes, that's what the data would show.
So, okay. If you look at page 17 of Exhibit 3928, this is the chart that we saw testified to before that shows and I know, say there may not be statistically significant, but the highest year for these unintentional opioid-related overdose deaths is 2009, right?
Yes.
And then are you familiar with the report or the publication that came out from the Injury Prevention Service Report discussing this data?
The Pearsall paper?
No, that was earlier. I'm talking about the data that goes all the way through 2017, the most recent data.
Yes.
Is this the most recent data?
This may be the most recent data I've seen published. I believe the state has some, it likely has more current data.
Have you asked Ms. Quinn to see it?
I haven't talked with Ms. Nguyen.
In connection with the work that you've done in this case, in arriving at your opinions that you've testified to, did you ask anyone to provide you with the most recent data available from the state of Oklahoma for unintentional opioid-related overdose deaths in this state?
Possibly.
Take a look, if you would, at page page 9.
Oh, okay.
This lists the most common substances by year of death, Oklahoma, 2007, 2017. You see that?
Yes.
And the top one here is hydrocodone, correct?
That's correct.
Is the Pentadol listed here?
I don't, it's not listed here, but I don't think that tapentadol is routinely screened for.
My question, doctor, is just whether it's listed there.
I know, but to just say that it's not listed here would be misleading if no one's ever been looking for tapentadol in urine or toxicology or blood samples. So I don't think that tapentadol it would be routinely screened for. So we wouldn't know how many deaths are necessarily involved tapentadol.
Okay, let's talk about fentanyl, if we would, okay?
Okay.
Did you learn in the course of the work that you've done in this case that after the FDA approved the Duragesic fentanyl patch, Janssen started to sell it, actively market and sell it in the early 1990s?
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
Did you learn in the course of the work that you did in this case in arriving at your opinions that Janssen began to actively market and sell its Duragesic fentanyl patch after it obtained FDA approval in the early 90s?
Yes.
And did you learn in the course of the work that you've done in this case in arriving at your opinions that in 2005 that patch went off patent?
Yes.
And did you learn that at that time Janssen cut back on its active marketing of the Duragesic fentanyl patch?
I don't know that I learned of that specifically, but that's typically what would happen when a product is no longer promoted.
And did you learn that by 2008, Janssen had really ceased all active marketing of its Duragesic fentanyl patch?
I mean,
Did you learn that or not?
I'm not sure I would say, I don't know if that's completely accurate, because they had a relationship with another company that was marketing it during that time, and they were keeping 90% of the profit, so.
Not my question, doctor. We're talking about the Duragesic brand fentanyl patch, okay?
The patch had another company's name on it, but it was basically the Duragesic brand.
We're talking about the Duragesic branded patch, okay? And what my client did in actively marketing and selling that patch, okay?
Okay.
And did you learn in the course of your work, in this case, in arriving at your opinions, that around 2008, Janssen stopped actively marketing and selling its branded Duragesic patch?
It stopped doing that itself.
Now, you were here for Ms. Nguyen's testimony, correct?
Yes, I was.
And you heard her testify that the highest 3-year period for deaths associated with fentanyl was 2015 to 2017, correct?
I believe so.
Have you made any effort to determine how many of those deaths involved illicit fentanyl?
I don't, it'd be very difficult to make that determination. I heard Claire Wynn's testimony on the topic, and the state's determination that most of the fentanyl deaths were likely to be prescription fentanyl, and the state's reasoning made sense to me. But
The question is whether you made any effort to determine that.
There's no way to determine.
I'm just asking if you made any effort.
I listened to Claire Wynn's testimony.
Other than that, did you make any effort personally to try to make that determination?
Don't quite understand your question, because there would be no way that I could make that determination.
That's fine, then. Thank you. So you've testified that you believe there's a public health problem that, in your words, was caused by overprescribing prescription opioids, correct?
That's correct.
And it's your view that there was a multifaceted marketing campaign behind that, correct?
That's correct.
Do you have a degree in marketing?
No, I do not have a degree in marketing.
Do you have a degree in economics?
No,
Do you have any formal training in economics?
no.
Do you have any training in economics generally or in health economics specifically?
No training.
Do you have a degree in sales?
I do not have a degree in sales.
You already said you're not a statistician, correct?
That's correct.
Are you an analytical chemist?
No,
Are you a pharmacologist?
no,
Are you an immunologist?
no.
Are you an epidemiologist?
I do work in the field of epidemiology and teach epidemiology. I don't know that there is a distinct degree in epidemiology, but that is a field that I work in.
Okay. Your practice area is as a psychiatrist, right?
My clinical work is psychiatry and addiction medicine.
You're not a general medical practitioner, right?
That's correct.
You don't work in the field of primary care, right?
I do not.
And you don't work in the field of pain management, right?
That is correct.
Now, your testimony is that this campaign, you say, caused doctors to overprescribe opioids and that sales representatives were part of that. Did I understand that correctly?
Small part.
Small part, okay? Isn't it true that at your deposition, when you were asked, you said you didn't know of a single Oklahoma doctor whose prescribing was influenced by a Janssen sales representative?
That was something that was true at the time.
In your testimony, you also talk about key opinion leaders, and you believe they were part of this multifaceted campaign, correct?
That's correct.
And at your deposition, and to be clear, you came to your deposition after you had prepared your expert disclosure, which we've already talked about, right?
Correct.
You knew at your deposition that you were going to be asked questions about your opinions so that they would be disclosed and they would be known before you came to trial, correct?
Yes, that's true.
And at that deposition, when you were asked, you said you had not heard from a single Oklahoma doctor that their prescribing practices were influenced by a key opinion leader. True?
I would need to review my deposition to know exactly what I said. I may have said, I probably said that I couldn't recall speaking to a specific doctor who said they were influenced by a key opinion leader, but I think I also said on my deposition that I had given talks in Oklahoma to physicians who did discuss with me this campaign to increase opioid prescribing, and they felt influenced by it. And I recall, I may have heard a physician say that they recall being influenced by a key opinion leader. But to know exactly what I said on my deposition, I'd need to take a look.
Do you believe in your were you truthful in your deposition?
Yes,
And your deposition was, what, 3 months ago?
yes,
And probably had a better memory of things in the past 3 months ago than you do today, right? All things being equal, does your memory of past events get better? If you do, I want to know how you do that.
no, I think my memory is pretty good.
Okay, well, let's look at your deposition. Do you have it in front of you?
I do.
Take a look at page 108. And why don't you go ahead and read starting at page 108, line 5. Just read it yourself. I'm going to try to see if we can refresh your recollection here. Down to line 22.
Line, I just want to make sure I'm on the right page because this seems...
Page 108.
Okay, line 5 to what?
Line 5 through line 22. And just read it. We're going to see if it refreshes your recollection, okay?
Yes, I've read that.
And you were being asked then, what I'm asking you about now, whether you had heard from any Oklahoma doctor that their prescribing practices were influenced by any key opinion leader. That was the subject we were talking
No,
about, right?
I must be on the wrong page because that's not what I'm looking at on page 108.
Okay. If you look at line 5,
I have, so I have starting on line 2. Do you know if they allocate costs
you must
under the?
have the wrong deposition.
Oh,
Look
okay.
at the cover of it, that must be, look for the March 27, 2019.
It has a black binding like this, like what
Oh.
you have.
May I approach Your Honor?
I'm not,
Sure.
do I have it? Thank you.
Probably
They
clear
they look
somewhere.
alike.
Yeah, it's strange.
I think it is. I think I have the right document.
Okay, so look at page 108.
What you were reading is not in my page 108. So,
Well,
what Dr. Kolodny was reading, I think you and I have the same one. I
Oh,
don't think
okay.
he did.
may I approach Your Honor?
Yeah.
See what's going on.
This is the one I had in it.
Use this one.
Okay,
I'll let you do this.
all right, thank you.
Okay, hopefully we're on the same page, 108. Line 5 through line 22. Just read it to yourself and then let me ask the question.
Yes, what I stated on my deposition is consistent with what I've just mentioned.
I just asked you to read it first,
Okay.
and then I'll go ahead and ask the questions, okay? So, the subject at this point is talking about key opinion leaders, correct?
Correct.
And whether you had spoken to anybody, a doctor in Oklahoma, who had told you that they had been influenced by a key opinion leader, correct?
Yes.
And your testimony there was that you did not recall a specific event or individual, but you believed it likely that somebody may have expressed to you some experience hearing from a key opinion leader, correct?
Yes, and I said.
And I asked you specifically, can you point to any specific one that you could recall? And you said not that you could recall clearly, correct? Wasn't that your testimony in your deposition?
Yes, I think I said a little more than that, but yes.
Now, this campaign that you've talked about also included continuing medical education programs, correct?
That's correct.
And is it true that at your deposition, when you came to express your opinions, to make sure that they were fully disclosed before trial, do you remember that you said that you didn't know or couldn't recall a single doctor in Oklahoma that told you that they had been influenced by a Janssen-specific CME?
Yes,
That was your testimony, correct?
I believe so.
So, one of the things that you've talked about as being part of this campaign is advocacy organizations, right?
Yes.
We're going to go through these, so let's do that one first. So, the advocacy organization that you spent the most time on was the Pain Care Forum. and you called that a front group, right?
Not really. I called the Pain Care Forum the opioid mafia. The group that I think I spent a lot of time talking about, the front group, would have been the advocacy organization was the American Pain Foundation.
Okay, well, let's talk about the Pain Care Forum, okay?
Oh, sure.
And I think we all remember that you called them the opioid mafia. Let me hand you Exhibit S0707. No, I think so. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is the American Pain Foundation and Pain Care Forum Epidemic of Pain in America with Representative Mike Rogers from Michigan that council asked you about. And wouldn't you agree, Dr. Kolodny, that you were aware of the Pain Care Forum, correct?
I'm sorry?
You were aware of the Pain Care Forum. You knew what it was, right?
When?
When you went and you made a presentation.
Yes, not in 2006, but yes.
Okay. Well, the fact that the Pain Care Forum had amongst its members opioid manufacturers wasn't hidden from people like you, was it?
I'm not sure what you mean by people like me. There were individuals who were invited to give presentations to the Pain Care Forum who would know about it. For example, members of federal agencies would be invited to speak at the Pain Care Forum. And so, and I actually heard about it from staff from federal agencies.
Was it hidden from federal agencies?
No, they met with people from federal agencies to try and influence them.
And you're saying that because some members of the Pain Care Forum were drug manufacturers, that in your opinion, that makes them the opioid mafia. Do I understand your testimony
No, that's
correctly?
not why I would call them the opioid mafia.
Did you ever make an effort to determine all of the membership of the Pain Care Forum?
Yes, I did.
Okay, let's look at that, if we could. I think we have a visual. Well, first of all, this is exhibit
State 1661?
I think it's 1661, Your Honor, yes. May I approach?
Yes. Thank you.
So this is a document, state's exhibit that's in evidence, and it's Pain Care Forum participating organizations, correct?
That's correct.
And this wasn't a secret, was it?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, let's look at some of the folks who were member organizations of this forum, okay?
Okay.
And I think we have a visual or a demonstrative that will help call this out. Keep going. This is the chart that you and Mr. Beckworth spent some time on. And what we've done is we brought out some of the member organizations of the Pain Care Forum that are referenced here on State's Exhibit 1661. And let's talk about a couple of them in particular. The top one, the Partnership at Drugfree.org. Are you familiar with that organization?
Very.
They provide support to families struggling with their children's substance abuse, right?
They do now.
And they provide resources for addressing abuse, correct?
I think they're trying to do that right now. They've recently stopped taking money from Purdue Pharma, I think, and other opioid manufacturers. So they are, and I think they did some good work in the past. They weren't a major player, but they did participate a little bit in the Pain Care Forum.
And they're listed here as one of the participating organizations, right?
They're listed, and they did co-sign a letter, I think, looking for higher reimbursement rates for abuse deterrent formulations, but they were not very active.
Yeah, I must object on the basis of optional completeness. 1661, they won't show the whole document to you, they're just showing part of it. If you look at the bottom left corner, it's one that they mark confidential, which is part of the issue that Dr. Gladney testified to the court, that you have to make this information public so people know what really happened.
Sure.
This company produced that document, as did others, are confidential.
Your Honor,
I just
may
asked
we,
it to be
may we
shown.
approach?
Yes.
Thank you. So let's look at some of these member organizations or participating organizations for the Pain Care Forum. Another one is the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, correct?
That's correct.
The American Society of Anesthesiologists, correct?
Correct.
The Amputee Coalition, correct?
Correct.
The Oncology Nursing Society, correct?
Yes.
The National Association of Directors of Nursing Administration, correct?
Correct.
The Hospice and Palliative Nurses Association, correct?
Correct.
The Hematology Oncology Pharmacy Association, correct?
Correct.
The DC Pediatric Palliative Care Collaboration, correct?
Correct.
Collaboration. Words are important, aren't they? Words matter, right?
They do.
Is there anything evil about the DC Pediatric Palliative Care Collaboration?
I've never heard of that organization before.
Do you think these organizations are all part of the opioid mafia?
I think these are organizations that are listed on this document as participating organizations. I happen to know that at least one organization here, like the Partnership at Drugfree.org, had very little to do with the Pain Care Forum other than taking money from Purdue and sort of allowing them to maybe use their name.
Not my question. So your testimony that all of these organizations were influenced by opioid manufacturers?
I can't testify to that. I've never heard of the Amputee Coalition. I don't know.
You've heard of the American Cancer Society, haven't you?
I've heard of the American Cancer Society, and I am very familiar with the Cancer Action Network. The Cancer Action Network was a very active member of the Pain Care Forum. That's not really the American Cancer Society, it's the lobby arm of the American Cancer Society, and they were one of the groups that participated in trying to block release of the CDC guideline, even though the CDC guideline explicitly stated that it was for primary care and not cancer pain.
Well, let's talk about this, Dr. Kolodny.
Sure.
Are you really saying the American Cancer Society or its lobbying arm was influenced to a point where it wasn't making independent decisions? Is that your testimony?
My testimony is that the Cancer Action Network of the American Cancer Society had a relationship with opioid manufacturers in which the amount of money they actually donated to the Cancer Action Network would, the more money they donated, the more time Cancer Action Network would spend on their issues, and that the Cancer Action Network actually lobbied against the release of the CDC guideline. CDC even spoke to them and said, why are you against our guideline? It's explicitly not about people with cancer. They didn't have an answer to that. So yes, the Cancer Action Network was an active member, and I think that would shock people because the American Cancer Society does terrific work and is a terrific organization, and I believe the Cancer Action Network does some very good work as well, but they took lots of money from opioid manufacturers and helped opioid manufacturers, and yes, did participate actively in the Pain Care Forum.
So you believe money influences people's opinions, right?
I believe that that there are organizations and individuals who took money from opioid manufacturers and took actions that benefited opioid manufacturers and were harmful to people with pain.
But you're saying that the money you're getting isn't influencing your opinions, is it?
That's correct. My opinions have been pretty consistent long before I was ever helping the state of Oklahoma litigate against your client.
And when you were offering your opinions about these key opinion leaders in this case, did you look to see what their opinions were before they were provided funding as key opinion leaders? Did you do that?
Are you asking me whether or not opioid manufacturers were paying them because they liked
No.
what they were saying?
No. Did you make any effort to determine whether those key opinion leaders had expressed opinions that you take issue with before they had received any funding from an opioid manufacturer? Did you make that effort to make that determination?
To see whether or not, so I just want to make sure I understand your
Let
question.
me be more clear. You're saying that, well, no, you're okay because you had these opinions before you got paid all this money, and that makes a difference. And I'm asking, did you make any effort before you came here and gave your testimony to determine if these key opinion leaders that you criticized for having some funding for some of their projects, whether they had their opinions before they received any of that funding?
I haven't made that effort, but it wouldn't
You've
surprise
answered You've answered my question, sir, okay? So do you think the American Action Network is now part of the opioid mafia?
I don't know what they're doing. I haven't looked at their actions recently. I know that they were very active in trying to block upscheduling of hydrocodone combination products, even though 2% of all hydrocodone prescriptions were for people with cancer.
So do you think they're
But
now
I
part
don't
of-
know if they're still, I'm very familiar with their past advocacy. Hopefully, they're no longer doing this.
And let me ask you one more thing and wrap up. You also testified about Robert Angarola, and you called him the J&J lawyer, right?
Yes, I did.
And you testified that Mr. Angarola testified before Congress at some point on what you would describe as the 80-20 rule, right?
Yes, I did testify to that.
And when you did that, Mr. Beckworth walked over to the pad over there, and he wrote down Robert Angarola, J&J lawyer, right? Remember
Yes,
that?
that happened.
And then Mr. Beckworth asked you that when he was with Johnson & Johnson in 1990, what was he doing? Do you remember that?
Yes,
And you testified that he was helping them change opium importation laws to be able to bring opium into the United States from Tasmania more easily. That was your testimony, right?
yes.
Did you intend to suggest through your testimony that Mr. Angarola was an employee of Johnson & Johnson?
No, he was their outside counsel.
You didn't say that in your testimony, did you?
I said he was J&J's lawyer.
You didn't say he was an outside counsel, did you?
I'm not sure if there's a distinction.
Well, when you say he's with Johnson & Johnson, that certainly sounds like it's more than an outside lawyer, doesn't it?
I think I said he's J&J's lawyer. I think of you as J&J's lawyer.
You were asked when he was with J&J. Do you remember that?
I'm sorry, you'd have to read back the...
In the course of the work that you did in this case, before you testified about Mr. Angarola, who was written down on that pad as being J&J lawyer, did you do anything to determine who he was?
I knew who he was before it was written down here.
Right, and he was a lawyer in private practice with the firm of Hyman, Phelps, and McNamara, correct?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And before you gave your testimony, did you take the time to read the testimony that Mr. Angarola actually gave in 1990?
Yes, I did.
And do you know that he testified about opium diversion in India?
Yes.
Do you think it was wrong for Mr. Angarola to testify to Congress about that issue?
Well, I think the reason that he was testifying about diversion in India is because they were making the argument that it's better for opium to come from Tasmania, but I'm not really going to comment on the merits of his testimony.
Have you look at Exhibit S900? S900, I believe, was the consensus statement. You remember that?
I do.
And Mr. Angarola was listed as one of the committee members, correct?
That's correct.
And you gave some pretty strong testimony that J&J's lawyer shouldn't have been involved on that committee. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any evidence you can show us that he was acting as Johnson & Johnson's lawyer on that committee?
I don't know what his role was on that committee. I just
So
know
maybe-
that he is a lawyer who worked for Johnson & Johnson, and I don't believe a lawyer should be drafting guidance for the medical community in how to prescribe opioids.
You think maybe before you came into court and accused Mr. Angarola of representing Johnson & Johnson on that committee, you should have tried to determine whether he was actually even representing Johnson & Johnson at the time?
I don't think I testified that he represented Johnson & Johnson on that committee. I said Johnson & Johnson's lawyer was on the committee.
And you have no evidence that he was representing Johnson & Johnson at that time, do you?
I don't know what his relationship was with Johnson & Johnson when he was serving on that committee.
So do you think maybe you should have investigated that before you testified that their lawyer was on that committee?
I did investigate it, and I do know that he was Johnson & Johnson's lawyer, and I do know that he was on the committee.
You know he was in 1990, not 1996, sir. Who was Mr. Angarola? Did you investigate who he actually was?
Yes, I believe he was a former government drug regulator who later worked to deregulate access to drugs.
He had expertise in this area, didn't he?
He was a former drug regulator.
He began his career, did you learn in the investigation you did of Mr. Angarola that he started his legal career in 1972 as a White House staff Special Action Office for Drug Abuse Prevention? Did you learn that?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And did you learn, as part of your investigation, that Mr. Angarola served as legal advisor to the UN International Narcotics Control Board in Geneva?
Yes, that sounds familiar.
And did you learn in the course of the investigation you did that Mr. Angarola returned to the White House in 1977 and served as general counsel in the Office of Drug Abuse Policy?
Yes, I looked at some of his credentials.
And did you learn that in 1978 he was named Assistant Director of the White House Domestic Policy Staff?
That sounds familiar.
And you're aware that in that position his portfolio included health and drug issues, right?
Yes.
Did you also learn that he served as the White House liaison to the Interagency Committee on New Therapies for Pain and Discomfort?
That sounds familiar.
Did you learn that he was a director of both the U.S. Cancer Pain Relief Committee and the Institute for Behavior and Health?
That does now sound familiar. I think I knew there was another connection to Johnson & Johnson. I couldn't quite remember what it was, but you just hit on it. So that is another way in which he was related to your client and while working on this guideline.
Did you learn that he was a consultant to the American Cancer Society's Advisory Committee on Cancer Pain Relief?
I'm not sure if I was aware of that.
Did you learn that he was counsel to the Association of Former Federal Narcotics Agents?
Yeah, I was aware that he was a formerly with drug regulation before he began working to deregulate drugs for your client.
That wasn't my question, sir. I'm asking you about something specific, and I would appreciate it if you wouldn't try to volunteer things beyond. Did you learn that when Mr. Angarola returned to private practice, that the White House's National Drug Control Strategy Report listed him among the expert individuals and organizations who had provided counsel?
I'm not sure.
I don't know if we have HHH. If I may approach you, I'm just using it to refresh recollection.
Yes.
Never mind. So, one of the items that was addressed in the consensus statement was drug abuse, right?
Yes, that's mentioned in the consensus statement.
And it also addressed diversion.
Yes, it does.
And are you saying that it was completely inappropriate for someone who's worked on diversion and abuse issues in multiple capacities with both the White House and the United Nations to be involved in drafting guidelines that address drug abuse and diversion?
There is, I believe, a sentence or two about diversion. It was not a document about diversion. It's a document calling for greater use of opioids for chronic pain and urging the medical community to prescribe more opioids.
It's not my question, Doctor.
That was not appropriate for a lawyer to be writing.
That wasn't my question. You agree that the consensus statement addressed the diversion of prescription opioid drugs, right?
I agree that there's mention of it on the consensus statement. It is not a consensus statement about that.
You agree that Mr. Angarola was an expert in that area, correct?
He was a former drug regulator, yes.
Not good enough for you?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
can you provide any evidence that Mr. Angarola had any compensation or payment from Johnson & Johnson in sitting on that committee, sir?
I don't know who was paying him for his time while he was on that committee.
Thank you. Your Honor, probably is a good time to break.
I think so. We will call the day. I do need to have a representative from the defendants and the state come up to talk about exhibits. Otherwise, we'll be adjourned, and we'll start again Monday morning at 8:30. So have a great weekend. Thank you.